r/AskReddit. Archaeologists of Reddit, what are some latest discoveries that the masses have no idea of? In my hometown of Lübeck in northern Germany, they found a latrine from the Middle Age and analyzed the genes of the tapeworms in it or something, and apparently that dude that took a shit there has once also taken a shit in England, cause his DNA has been found in tapeworms there as well. I'm primarily an Egyptologist, but I work for a UK regional archaeology crew, and recently they found a specific vessel which was very unusual. It's hard to describe, but I couldn't find a picture, but it was a smallish clay pot, which had been made on a wheel, and was incredibly well made, but the neck of it was tiny, and it pinched in and out at points. Bad description, I know. Anyway, we got it dated to around the Stuart era, and gave it over to a potter who we sometimes worked with, so he could attempt to make a copy. He couldn't do it. He made a lovely pot, but it was nothing like the original. He explained that he couldn't get the clay thin enough to pinch like the original, because his hands were simply too big to make a pot with a neck of that size. So after a lot of thought they came to a conclusion that it must have been children making these pots. I suggested women, but it turned out even women's hands were too big. Based on other circumstantial evidence from the same context, this was from a relatively poor family who trained their children in the same trade as them to create beautiful pottery to sell to the elites. In the Stuart era, that style of pottery was around a lot, but it had started not too far from the city we found it in, so we figured they must have been copying the popular style. It's so interesting to think that a child, probably no more than 8, made such a beautiful piece of work. Edit. Just adding for clarification, as it seems to have confused some people. When I said I'm an Egyptologist, I mean that's my main link to archaeology. The pot I'm talking about here is from a regional archaeology find. It's Stuart, as in its English, and dates from the 15th/16th centuries. It's not Egyptian, just to clear up any confusion. This is more biological anthro/archaeology, but recently a jawbone of Denisovan remains was found in Tibet, which is crazy, since those are super difficult living conditions, even in today's lifetime. So far the other remains have been found in Siberia. Denisovans have only come up in conversation and discovery quite recently, so it's always crazy to find any sort of remains. Really gives an idea to our development and what we might have evolved from. Edit. Sleepiness and just general dumbness led me to adding that Denisovans and Neanderthals lived in the same area. I included this since the original cave in Siberia, where the Denisovan remains were found, Neanderthal remains were also found. This led my little brain to come to this big conclusion, which is obviously false, so thank you to everyone who corrected me. Don't know how major or interesting this is, but in Athens, in the area of Phaleros, which used to be the port of ancient Athens before it was moved to Piraeus, during some excavations for the construction of a cultural center, a huge cemetery was discovered. An entire year of construction was put on hold, and this is a frequent problem in Athens. Major construction work running into ancient buried buildings which now have to be preserved. Apparently the cemetery is interesting, not only because it hosts many dead babies and children, which were buried inside vessels. Infant mortality rate was very high, but also many prisoners and criminals who were executed. There's also a mass grave of about 80 shackled men. It has been speculated the mass grave may be related to Cylon of Athens, a winner in the Olympics who tried to take over the Acropolis, and who was promptly chased out of there, and escaped to Megara. His followers sought refuge in the altar of Athena Pallius. Anyone present at an altar was considered to be under the protection of the gods, and was not allowed to be harmed. They agreed to descend the Acropolis after it, being promised they would be left unharmed, but were slaughtered nonetheless by the followers of Megacles, as they considered the men unworthy of the gods' protection. Recently a ton of phenomenal finds have been excavated in Britain. Examples being a preserved Iron Age shield found in Leicestershire, which changes how we perceived Iron Age British tribal equipment in combat, hoping it will open the door to a broader understanding of the military capabilities of this period, and that C14 dating will give us a more specific dating assessment. I've mainly worked in classical Greek and Imperial Roman archaeology, and Vindolanda is one such site which has been pumping out phenomenal research and artifact findings, being a reasonably well preserved Roman fort along Hadrian's Wall. Artifacts are found daily. During the past couple of weeks, Finds have ranged from leather shoes, tent canvas, even bathhouse sandals to prevent you burning your feet on the hot tiles. These finds have opened a window of immense understanding of daily life within a Roman defensive fort. Not an archaeologist, but they are using lidar to uncover more buried temples all over the world. The ones that intrigue me are in South America and Cambodia at Angkor Wat. This one always bugs me as an archaeologist. Not because of the public, but because of our own slow adoption of technology. There have been archaeologists using lidar since the early 2000s. It's only becoming popular now because of a few large-scale applications. Its use should be standard in the discipline, but we have pretty much no standards whatsoever. I know other archaeologists will argue we don't have the money. We don't have the money because we are too traditionalist and conservative to change some of the most basic things in archaeology. Anyway, it's still really cool stuff. Edit. Thank you Reddit friend for the silver. It's at the museum I work at right now. It's a mammoth bone that the museum is claiming has human processing marks. They refuse to let other anthropologists look at it to really examine the marks. So I'm calling BS, or at least I'm skeptical. I got to look at it very briefly along with some other anthropologists, but then the museum stops everyone. It has everyone pretty split. It was found in San Diego, and if this was to be true, it would rewrite everything about human migration we know. This is not a small museum. This is a public museum, not religiously affiliated, that is making a large claim. A lot of infighting RN. Edit. Here's a link. I'm at an airport, and I'm not sure it will work. But if you want to know more, you can always Google it. I'm an archaeologist who mostly works in the private sector. We find a lot of cool stuff, but almost everything we do is classified to some degree or another to discourage pot hunters and vandalism. This year I've found an extension of a really important late woodland, the period right before Europeans arrived in America, site, and worked on a very cool 19th century burial ground that had been partially destroyed out of negligence by a construction company, which is a big problem we run into. Both sites were super cool, but I can't get into specifics about where they are located. The remains of the last slave ship to smuggle imported slaves into America after it was outlawed was just found in Alabama. I don't know a lot about it because I'm not an underwater archaeologist, though. Okay, I've got another one related to my actual degree, Egyptology. The tomb of Nefertep was discovered in the early 1900s, but it was badly damaged, and therefore we are still investigating all the material we have. A lot of it was burned by tomb robbers, but there is still some epigraphic evidence. One of the most interesting pieces is a tiny piece of pottery with a serek on it, the symbol of the name of the king. For context, Nefertep was from pre-dynastic Egypt, just before the first dynasty. And this is where it gets exciting. Nefertep is believed to be the mother of the first pharaoh of Egypt. However, on this piece of pottery, her name is written in a serek, indicating she was a pharaoh. Of course it's possible that it was just indicating her as queen, but it's quite fun to think that there's a very good chance the first pharaoh of Egypt was a woman. Furthermore, as far as we can tell, this is the earliest ever surviving evidence of a woman's name written down. We all thought that was pretty cool. I don't know if it's national news or anything, but a bunch of fossils and bones of some sort of horned dino were just found on a construction site in Highlands Ranch, Colorado. My cousin's boyfriend was one of the workers that found them. Some dick on his team was trying to load his truck up with a bunch of the fossils and bones and destroyed them. The museum had to confiscate stuff from him. But it's still pretty cool that Colorado has another dinosaur. I think we've had another dinosaur and another really good set of fossils found here. Also, I know this is paleontology and not archaeology, but it's still cool, and I wasn't thinking about that when I decided to post. I'm surprised at the mass amount of people that haven't heard of the lunar settlement in Pensacola, Florida. It was the first European multi-year settlement in the country and dates to 1559. The story is tragic, and we have the unique opportunity to not only investigate the land settlement, but also the shipwrecks right off the coast. Additionally, I'm working on a Native American site across the bay this summer. We are trying to see if natives were present during Luna's time here, because it appears that the natives just peaced out when they saw his ships rolling up through the bay, which may explain why they didn't help him and his company. Very cool history here. Highly recommend looking it up. I'd love it if you liked and subscribed.